Hey there, motherfucker. Welcome to the deep dive. You ready to get your ears fucked up?
Hell yeah.
All right, so this deep dive is for mature audiences only. We're going to get raw and uncensored today as we dig into some killer sources. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to untangle the origins of heavy metal music. Our listener sent in a stack of research on Black Sabbath. We're talking about how a bunch of working-class Brits created a sound that would shake the fucking world.
Yeah, and let's be real, we're not going to sugarcoat shit here.
Damn right. So when most people think about the birth of heavy metal, they think Birmingham, right?
Yeah, Birmingham. But that's not the whole story. It's more complicated than that. Birmingham was the city, but the real breeding ground was this fucked up district called Aston, bombed out buildings, factories spewing smoke.
Oh, wow.
The whole landscape just screamed despair.
Shit, that's hardcore. I bet that bleakness seeped into the music.
Exactly. And I think that's a key piece of the puzzle. You can hear that feeling of being trapped, of being surrounded by darkness in their music.
Fuck, that's some deep shit. But everyone always lumps Sabbath in with Led Zeppelin. They were both heavy bands in the early 70s, so what's the big fucking difference?
Well, they're both heavy. But, see, Zeppelin was heavy, no doubt, but they were still rooted in blues and rock and roll. They used standard tuning, typical song structures, all that familiar shit. Sabbath, on the other hand, they took a hard left turn.
Oh, real?
They started messing with modal scales, which gave them a totally different, almost unsettling sound.
Wait, hold up a sec. Modal scales. What the fuck are those?
It's kind of like this. You know how blues uses a specific set of notes, right? Like it has a particular flavor.
Yeah, get that.
Well, modal scales use different note combinations. They create a darker, more dissonant vibe.
Okay.
Sabbath also used power chords, which are these super simple but heavy as fuck chords.
Nice.
And then there's the down tuning.
Down tuning, like just playing the guitar with the strings all loosey-goosey.
Not exactly loosey-goosey, but yeah. They detuned their guitars to get a heavier, thicker sound.
I see.
It's like taking a chainsaw and replacing the blade with a fucking battle axe.
Oh, shit.
And there's a cool story behind it.
All right, hit me with it.
So, Tony Iommi, Sabbath's guitarist, lost the tips of 2 fingers in a factory accident when he was a kid.
Holy shit. No wonder their music is so dark.
Right. But here's the thing. Because of his injury, Iommi had to find new ways to play. He started tuning his guitar down so the strings were easier to press. And that accident ended up shaping the entire sound of heavy metal.
No fucking way. That's one hell of a story, tuning a tragedy into something iconic like that.
Exactly. Iommi's playing style forced him to rely on those power chords. And that, combined with the down tuning, gave Sabbath their signature heaviness.
Okay, so Sabbath's sound was influenced by this fucked up industrial landscape, Iommi's injury, and their use of modal scales and down tuning. What about the lyrics? Were they singing about the same shit as Zeppelin?
Not even close. Zeppelin sang about mythology, fantasy, and all that mystical stuff. Sabbath, on the other hand, they were singing about the horrors of war, about social injustice and the dark underbelly of society.
So while Zeppelin was getting high and singing about hobbits, Sabbath was staring into the abyss and screaming about the bullshit of the world.
Exactly. Their lyrics reflected the anxieties and frustrations of working-class life in post-war Britain.
Wow.
They were pissed off, and they were afraid to express it.
Fuck yeah. And that rawness, that anger, it's a huge part of what makes heavy metal so powerful.
Absolutely. It's about finding a voice when you feel like you're being ignored or pushed around. It's about taking that rage and turning it into something creative and cathartic.
So it's more than just music. It's a way of life.
You got it. Heavy metal is a philosophy, an attitude, a way of confronting the darkness and refusing to back down.
Damn straight. So we've got this bleak environment, a guitarist who turned a tragedy into innovation, and lyrics that spit in the face of convention. What else is there to unpack about these Sabbath motherfuckers?
All right, so let's dig a little deeper into this heavy metal evolution. Remember how we talked about those early pioneers like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin?
Yeah, those guys were heavy hitters.
Well, things are about to get even wilder.
Fuck yeah. Bring on the next generation of metal maniacs.
We're about to explore the bands that took those early innovations and just crank them up to 11.
More speed, more aggression.
More speed, more aggression, and a whole lot more theatrics.
So we're talking about the bands that solidified heavy metal as its own genre. The ones who took that raw energy and shaped it into a fucking monster.
Precisely. They took the blueprint laid down by Sabbath and Zeppelin, and they forged something entirely new and even more intense.
Okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. Hit me with some names. Who are we talking about?
Well, one band that immediately comes to mind is Motorhead. They burst onto the scene in the mid-70s. led by the legendary Lemmy Kilmister.
Lemmy. That dude was a fucking icon. Bass, vocals, whiskey, cigarettes. The man was a force of nature.
Absolutely. And his music reflected that raw, uncompromising energy. Motorhead took the speed and aggression of punk rock and fused it with the heavy blues riffs of bands like Sabbath.
So they were like a bridge between the punk scene and the burgeoning world of heavy metal.
Exactly. They took the energy of punk and gave it a metallic edge. And they didn't hold back. Their music was fast, loud, and right in your face.
And Lemmy's voice, that raspy, almost shouted vocal style.
Yeah. That became a trademark of heavier metal subgenres. It was a far cry from the melodic vocals of traditional rock and roll, and it perfectly captured the raw intensity of their music.
He was like he was spitting venom with every word.
Speaking of Venom, there was another band that pushed the boundaries even further.
You mean Venom? Weren't those the guys who sang about Satan and all that fucked up shit?
Yep, those are the ones. They took the theatrical side of Black Sabbath and just cranked it up to a whole new level. Their music was raw, aggressive, and often explicitly dealt with satanic themes.
So they were basically the bad boys of heavy metal, the ones your parents warned you about.
Pretty much. But beyond the shock value, Venom played a huge role in shaping the sound of extreme metal. They embraced faster tempos, heavier distortion, and even more intense vocals than their predecessors.
So they were like the missing link between Black Sabbath and those heavier bands that came later, like Slayer or Metallica.
Exactly. They provided a blueprint for those more extreme subgenres to build upon.
Okay, so we've got Motorhead and Venom pushing the boundaries of speed and aggression. But what about the musical side of things? Did they introduce any new innovations?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most significant innovations of this era was the evolution of drumming. We talked about how Bill Ward from Black Sabbath moved away from that standard rock and roll backbeat. But Motorhead's drummer, Phil "Filthy Animal" Taylor, took things even further.
Yeah, his drumming was insane. It was like a nonstop assault.
He increased the tempo and intensity.
Yeah.
Laying the groundwork for what we now call the blast beat.
The blast beat. That's that super fast drumming that sounds like a machine gun, right?
You got it. That technique became a cornerstone of extreme metal subgenres, like thrash and death metal. It added a whole new level of aggression and intensity to the music.
It's like the drums went from a laid-back groove to a full-on sonic attack. It's incredible how one little change can have such a massive impact.
And that's how heavy metal evolved. It was a series of small changes, innovations, and experimentations that built upon each other.
Speaking of innovations, what about the new wave of British heavy metal? That whole NWOBHM thing.
Ah, the NWOBHM. This movement was like a wildfire, exploding in the late 70s and early 80s with bands like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Diamond Head.
All right, break it down for me. What made the NWOBHM so special?
These bands took everything that was awesome about Sabbath, Motorhead, Venom, all those early pioneers, and added their own unique twists.
Interesting.
Iron Maiden, for example, became known for their epic song structures, their complex harmonies and lyrics steeped in history and mythology.
Yeah, I could see how those guys would appeal to the Dungeons & Dragons crowd.
Totally. And then you have Judas Priest, who practically invented the twin guitar attack, creating these soaring, harmonized leads that were both melodic and heavy as fuck.
Didn't those guys also bring the whole leather and studs look to heavy metal?
They definitely helped popularize it, and that visual element, the image, became a huge part of heavy metal's identity.
Right. And what about Diamond Head? They're not as well known as Maiden or Priest. What was their deal?
Diamond Head were a bit more underground, but they were incredibly influential. Their music was a bit more progressive, with complex arrangements and a focus on melody.
So they were like the thinking man's metal band.
You could say that, but they were still heavy as hell. And their influence can be heard in some of the biggest metal bands that came after them, especially Metallica.
Wait, Metallica was influenced by Diamond Head. I never knew that.
It's true. Metallica covered a few Diamond Head songs early in their career. And you can hear those influences in their songwriting. It's like these bands were passing the torch, building upon each other's ideas to create something even more powerful.
Damn, that's fucking cool. It's like a family tree of heavy metal, with each band branching out and evolving in its own way.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of heavy metal. It's a constantly evolving beast, always pushing boundaries and exploring new territory.
So we've got these British bands creating this sonic earthquake. But what about the rest of the world? Were there any other heavy metal hotspots popping up? So we've got this heavy metal wildfire spreading from the UK, but what about across the pond? Did America just sit back and let the Brits have all the fun?
Hell no. America had its own heavy metal awakening, but it took a slightly different path.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the lowdown on how America got in on this metal madness.
Well, remember how we talked about those bands that bridge the gap between the pioneers and the more extreme stuff? Bands like Motorhead and Venom.
Yeah, those guys were like the missing link, right?
Exactly. Well, those bands had a huge influence on the American metal scene. They planted the seeds for what would become thrash metal.
Thrash metal. That's the stuff that makes your head bang so hard your neck hurts.
You got it. Fast tempos, aggressive riffs, and politically charged lyrics. It was like punk rock, heavy metal, and a shot of adrenaline all rolled into one.
And who are the big players in this American thrash metal explosion?
Oh man, where do I even begin? There was Metallica, of course, who we mentioned earlier. They started in California, but they quickly became a global phenomenon.
Yeah, those guys became the poster boys for heavy metal, didn't they?
They were definitely one of the most influential bands of the 80s and beyond. They took those thrash elements, combined them with their own musical prowess, and created something truly unique.
Intricate riffs, insane drumming, and James Hetfield's voice. It was like a sonic assault.
They were masters of their craft, and they weren't afraid to experiment. They incorporated elements of speed metal, progressive rock, and even classical music into their sound.
But it wasn't just about being fast and loud, right?
Yeah.
Their lyrics had some serious depth to them.
Absolutely. They weren't singing about partying and getting wasted. They tackled serious issues like war, social injustice, mental health, and the darker side of human nature.
It's like they gave a voice to all that anger and frustration that people were feeling but couldn't express.
Exactly. They tapped into something raw and real, and that's what made them so powerful. But Metallica wasn't the only band making waves in the American thrash scene.
Oh, yeah. Who else was there?
Well, you had Slayer, who took things even further in terms of aggression and darkness. Their music was brutal. Their lyrics often dealt with death and violence. And they became known for their intense live shows.
Slayer. Weren't those the guys who had all that controversy about their satanic imagery?
Yeah, they definitely pushed the boundaries, which pissed some people off. But that's part of what made them so appealing to their fans. They weren't afraid to challenge norms and confront taboos.
So while Metallica was becoming the mainstream face of thrash, Slayer was lurking in the shadows, exploring the darker side of the genre.
Exactly. And then you had Megadeth, formed by former Metallica guitarist Dave Mustaine. They were known for their intricate musicianship and Mustaine's politically charged lyrics.
So Mustaine was basically like, Metallica kicked me out, but I'll show them. I'll start my own band and be even more badass.
Haha. There was definitely some rivalry there, which fueled both bands to push themselves creatively. And then you had Anthrax, who brought a bit more humor and melody to the thrash scene.
So while Slayer was all about darkness, and Metallica was exploring the depths of human suffering, Anthrax was injecting a little fun into the mix.
You could say that. They didn't shy away from serious topics, but they also had a playful side that set them apart from some of their peers.
So it's like the American thrash scene had all these different flavors, from the political rage of Megadeth to the brutal intensity of Slayer to the dark melodies of Metallica.
Exactly. And these bands helped establish heavy metal as a major force in American music, influencing countless other bands and inspiring generations of metalheads.
Okay, so we've got the Brits kicking things off with Sabbath and the NWOBHM, and then the Americans take the baton and run wild with thrash metal. What happened next? Did heavy metal just keep getting faster and heavier?
Well, things didn't stop there. Heavy metal is like a hydra. You cut off one head and two more grow back.
That's a pretty fucked up image, but I get what you're saying. So what other heads sprouted from this heavy metal beast?
Oh man, so many. The 80s and 90s saw an explosion of subgenres. You had death metal, which took the aggression and darkness of thrash to the extreme.
Death metal. That shit sounds terrifying.
It can be pretty intense. Guttural vocals, blast beats, lyrics about death and decay, and often incredibly complex and technical musicianship.
So it's like thrash metal got possessed by a demon.
That's one way to put it. And then you had black metal, which emerged from the frozen wastelands of Scandinavia.
Black metal. Now that sounds even more sinister. What's the deal with that?
Black metal is a whole other beast. It's raw, atmospheric, often incorporating elements of folk music and pagan mythology. The lyrics often deal with darkness, nihilism, and a rejection of Christianity.
So it's like heavy metal met Vikings and had a really bad acid trip.
That's a pretty accurate description. But beyond the imagery and the extremity, black metal is also known for its innovative use of atmosphere and melody.
Okay, so we've got death metal and black metal. Two pretty extreme branches of the heavy metal family tree. What other weird and wonderful creatures emerged from this metal swamp?
Well, there's doom metal, which is all about slow, heavy riffs, a sense of impending doom, and lyrics often dealing with despair and hopelessness.
Doom metal. Sounds like the soundtrack to the apocalypse.
I can definitely have that vibe. And then you have power metal, which is more melodic and epic, often with fantasy-inspired lyrics.
So like heavy metal for people who play Dungeons & Dragons.
Exactly. And then there's prog metal, which combines the complexity and technicality of progressive rock with the heaviness of metal.
So it's like heavy metal for music nerds who like to show off their chops.
Uh-huh. There's definitely an element of that. But prog metal can also be incredibly creative and innovative, pushing the boundaries of songwriting and musicianship.
Damn, this heavy metal family tree is getting pretty damn complex. But it's awesome to see how this genre keeps evolving and branching out in all these different directions.
And that's what's so exciting about heavy metal. It's a constantly evolving beast, always pushing boundaries, exploring new sounds, and reflecting the anxieties, frustrations, and hopes of the world.
And all that started with those gloomy bastards from Aston. It's mind-blowing to think about how far it's come.
It is, and we haven't even scratched the surface of all the subgenres and sub-subgenres that exist today.
Yeah, our listener would need a lifetime to explore all of that. But hey, maybe that's a good thing. Heavy metal's a journey, not a destination.
You got it. And it's a journey that's full of surprises, challenges, and rewards.
So what does this all mean for our listener? What's the takeaway from this wild ride through heavy metal history?
I think the takeaway is this. Heavy metal is more than just a genre of music. It's a community, a culture, a way of life. It's about finding your tribe, expressing yourself without fear, and challenging the status quo.
It's about turning that anger, that frustration, that sense of alienation into something powerful and creative.
Exactly. Heavy metal is a celebration of individuality, a rejection of conformity, and a sonic middle finger to anyone who tries to tell you how to live your life.
Damn straight. So to our listener out there,
Yeah.
go crank up some Sabbath, explore the vast and twisted landscape of heavy metal, and never be afraid to let your freak flag fly.
And never forget, stay heavy, motherfucker.